Welcome to our data input tutorial for GraphPad Prism 7.0. Today you are going to learn how to input data correctly to create a high-quality single-case design graph. First, to begin, I'm going to show you a session log that we use here in our clinic. So on the session log, you can find all of the important information that you would need to set up a spreadsheet. For example, it shows you how many sessions were conducted in each condition, and the therapist that ran that condition, as well as here there's a spot for any important comments or notes. Down here at the bottom you can see different tabs, and these represent the different settings in which data were collected. So throughout our time we will refer back to this session log to help us set up our spreadsheet. So to set up a spreadsheet in Prism, double click on the Prism icon, and you will see a box appear, and you want to make sure under New Table and Graph that XY is highlighted. Under Enter and Import Data next to X, make sure that Numbers is clicked. Under Y, you want to click Enter and plot a single Y value for each point. Then click Create. Now you will see a spreadsheet that is blank appear, and this is where you will input your data. So first you can see there are several columns across the top. We have an X column as well as several Y columns. Our X column is going to correspond with our X axes on the graph, and these different Y columns will correspond with our different dependent variables that go on our graph. So we're first going to set up our X column, and on this box that says X title, click and type the word sessions, because our X column is going to be our sessions. Now that you have sessions up here at the top, it's time to input the amount of sessions that you had for this first setting. So to double check, we're going to look at our session log. As you can see, for this first setting, there were 15 sessions conducted total. So I'm going to make sure that in this column I have 15. So here you could type in 1 through 15, but to prevent any typographical errors, Prism has a feature in which it can auto-populate a series for you. So to do that, you want to click on this button with this down arrow that says Insert a sequence of numbers. So we're going to create a series with 15 because that's how many sessions that we conducted. And you want to start with your first value of 1 and click OK. So now you can see that Prism has auto-populated 15 sessions for you. As a side note, you could leave your X column completely blank, and Prism will use the numbers here and auto-populate your graph that way. But to show you this feature, we went ahead and put in our sessions here. Now that we have our x-axis taken care of, it's time to fill in our different y values with our conditions and our target behaviors. So for this video tutorial example, we are tracking SIB, which stands for self-interest behavior. We're tracking pica, which is the consumption of inedible items, and we are also tracking item engagement. However, you may be tracking different target behaviors, and that's what you would put up here at the top. So for our first group A, we had a baseline condition. So on this first box, we're going to type in baseline, and then for our first target behavior, we're going to type SIB. Next, we're going to come over here to group B, and we had another behavior that we tracked during baseline, so I'm going to type baseline here, and then I'm going to put pica. Next, I'm going to put in our treatment condition name, which was competing items, and I also tracked SIB during that condition, so we're going to type competing items, SIB, and here we're going to type competing items, and we tracked pica. Finally, we also tracked item engagement. So as you can see, I'm putting all of these different target behaviors that came under the same condition in different columns. And the reason for this is because Prism does not allow you to put in a phase change line between baseline and treatment unless you put your data into a different column and stagger that data. So that's why we're separating out each by target behavior and condition. For item engagement, later we will turn this dependent variable into a bar chart, so we will not need to stagger the data throughout. So now that we have our spreadsheet all set up, it's time to start inputting our raw data. So now we can see all of the raw data files that our data collection system, BDataPro, gives us. So here you can see these last three letters give us the setting and the condition. So CLI is the clinic setting and BAS means baseline. This session was conducted on 9/1/2017 and it was a primary data collector that was collecting this data. And then this was 001, which stands for our first session. So for our purposes, we will always input the data from the primary data collector. So we're ready for our first session of baseline in the clinic setting. So here's what it looks like when you open up a raw data file from BDataPro. And you can see there are three boxes. The first box is the summary measures for total time. The next box is the local summary for session time. And then the third box is the local summary for pause time. So for our purposes today, we're only going to be worrying about this first box here. So to orient you, you can see here we have our frequency keys for our target behaviors, which were SIB and PICA. And here we have our duration keys, which was our target behavior item engagement. So under frequency keys, you can see you have RPM, which stands for responses per minute. And this is the raw data that we will use for our graph. And down here, you can see percentage total of duration, which means percentage total of item engagement. And this here is the value that we will use for our graph. So first to begin, we are going to copy and paste this data right into our spreadsheet. So to do that, you want to highlight your raw data values by clicking and dragging over the numbers, and then right-clicking with your mouse and selecting copy. Now you can see that Excel has allowed you to copy these raw data values and you're going to input them into your spreadsheet. So under baseline conditions in our first session, I'm going to right-click on this and click paste. And now my data has pasted into my spreadsheet. One thing that's important to note is that our spreadsheet matches our raw data file. So you can see SIB comes first and PICA comes next. Just like on our raw data file, SIB came first and PICA was next. So now that we have our frequencies put in, we can copy and paste our duration key. So same thing, I'm going to click to highlight, right-click and copy. Come over to our spreadsheet and you want to put it into the first session into item engagement and click paste. So now we have our first session copy and pasted into our data spreadsheet. So then it's time to get our second session input into our file. So here's our second session of baseline in the clinic setting, making sure I'm getting the data from this first box here. And you can copy and paste it like I showed you for the first session, or you can also use your keyboard to hit Control-C and then come to your spreadsheet and hit Control-V to paste that in. It might just be a little bit faster depending on what you prefer. So now that I've got my frequency keys in, I'm going to go down to my duration keys for item engagement and input that in session 2. You'll continue to do this until you've completed all your sessions of baseline. Okay, now that we have all 3 sessions of baseline input into our spreadsheet, it's time to switch over because as you can see on our session log, we started a competing items treatment condition at session 4. So we're going to go to session 4. As you can see, our title of our raw data file has also changed. So now instead of baseline, it says COM, which stands for competing items. So we're going to go to that data, and we will click to highlight and get the data for our SIB and PICA. We're going to make sure when we come over here that we stagger it into a new column under competing items, SIB and PICA, and paste that there. We'll go back and grab our item engagement, and we can just put that under session 4 into item engagement. Now that we've done session 4, we can go to session 5. Put it underneath session 5 under our competing items. As you can see, the data start to become staggered there. Grab item engagement and put it under session 5. So you'll continue to do data input like this until you've completed your data input for all 15 sessions. Okay, now we have all of our sessions input for our first setting. So it's time to label this data table that corresponds with this setting. So to do that, we're going to click to highlight and then right click, and we're going to rename this sheet. And this sheet was our clinic setting. Okay, now that we have our clinic data spreadsheet set up, it's time to do our other 2 settings. So as you go to your session log, you can see the next setting was the home setting. So Prism has a feature in which you can clone a spreadsheet so you don't have to set it up again. So to do that, you can right click and duplicate family. Then click OK. So now you have a spreadsheet that looks exactly like your first spreadsheet. The first thing that you want to do is to cut the data that's from that spreadsheet because it's exactly the same as your first spreadsheet. So you want to click and drag your mouse to highlight all of your data and cut. Make sure that you don't click your x-axis when you're clicking to delete that because Prism will not allow you to delete the data. It's also important to make sure that although you have duplicated your spreadsheet from your first setting, that your amount of sessions match the amount of sessions that you need for your second setting. So I'm going to double check that in my home setting, we also conducted 15 sessions, and I have 15 sessions on this spreadsheet. Now I'm going to rename this spreadsheet to match my next setting. Right click and click rename this sheet. And this is our home setting, so we will type this in as home. Okay, so now we have a new data spreadsheet all set up, ready to go to input our raw data. So just like before, we're going to go to our raw data files under our home setting. As you can see, the file names are a little bit different to represent where you collected data. So now these say HOM, which stands for the home setting, and again, BAS is baseline on 9/2 of 2017, and this is our first session. So that's the first session we need. Just like before, our BDataPro files look exactly the same, and we're going to start by clicking and highlighting and copying in our first set of baseline data. So I'm going to click to copy and put that under my first session of baseline for SIB and PICA. And then I'm going to input my item engagement, click to copy, and put that under my first session. Now that I have my first session in, I can go back to my raw data files and do my second session just like I did my first. Okay, now that we have all of our baseline sessions in for the home setting, it's time to switch over to our columns and input the data for our competing items. So just the same as before, you can see this data file has a different name. COM stands for competing items in the home setting for session 6. So I'm going to click to copy. And when I paste this in, it's going to be session 6 under the competing items column. Grab my item engagement and put that in under session 6. So as you can see, just like our first data table, our data are going to begin to be staggered. All right, now we have our data all input for our second setting, which was the home setting. And so now it's time to check our session log. And we can see that our final setting was the school setting. So same thing as before, we are going to duplicate this spreadsheet so we can create another spreadsheet that's exactly the same as our first one. So click this home spreadsheet, right click, and click duplicate family, and click OK. Now you have a spreadsheet that's just like your first home sheet. So I'm going to click and highlight, drag my mouse over and delete all of this data. And then I want to make sure that my spreadsheet still has the correct number of sessions, just like my session log. So when my home spreadsheet carries over, it's only going to give me 15 sessions just like the first one. So I want to make sure that I don't need any more sessions. So we had 15 sessions for our school setting, so we're good to go on this spreadsheet. So now I'm going to click and right click to rename this sheet, and this is going to be our school setting. So now we have our final spreadsheet all set up to input the raw data. So just as before, you're going to pull up the raw data files from BDataPro. And as again, you can see that the file name has changed just a little bit. So now we have SCH, which stands for the school setting in the baseline condition. So we'll pull that up. And just like before, we will copy and paste our data in. So I'm going to click to copy and put that in. And you'll continue to fill this spreadsheet in until you've reached all the sessions of baseline, and then you will switch over to your competing items column. Okay, now that we have all 15 sessions input into our final spreadsheet, we have input all of our raw data in for all 3 data tables and all 3 settings in which data were collected. It's a good idea to go back and spot check for accuracy to make sure that when you are copying and pasting, you put it into the correct session. So it's a good idea to go back through and look at a session and pull up a raw data file just to double check. So now you're ready to go to begin creating a high quality single case graph. Thank you for watching.